Hello Scrufftards, welcome to the War Zone. I'm Scruffy and this is Scruffy Tales. So the other day I made a video on the fly concerning an article I read describing just how well NATO doctrine works in Ukraine when Ukrainian troops have adopted NATO doctrine, NATO thinking and NATO tactics. So I figured why not make a more detailed video on that subject. So here we are, my more detailed video concerning how NATO doctrine actually works down in Ukraine. So I think it's something like 70,000, if not more, Ukrainians that have been trained by Western militaries, primarily in the United Kingdom, but elsewhere as well. And they have, of course, received Western training, been taught Western tactics and what have you. And if you recall, there was a lot of critique early on aimed at NATO and Western militaries because they hadn't waged a war like the war, total war, all-out war like we're seeing in Ukraine. And the critique was that Western militaries didn't understand modern warfare. They could only fight insurgents in Afghanistan, more or less. And what they were teaching the Ukrainians was more or less useless. And a lot of that critique, for some reason, boiled down to the lack of air power. Ukraine did not have air superiority, so therefore they could not implement Western tactics when confronted with the enemy. And I always thought that was the most insane critique ever, because moving around in the trenches, the tactics you rely on in the trenches is not affected by friendly aircraft being overhead. You still do the same thing in the trenches. And I think there was also a rather massive confusion on why NATO and Western militaries trained Ukrainians in certain techniques and tactics and what have you. NATO and the other countries received requests from the Ukrainian military on what to teach Ukrainian soldiers. And that requires planning. So the Western armies, they planned for months what to do and how to achieve the goals they needed to achieve with these Ukrainian recruits. And then teaching them what the Ukrainian army wanted them to be taught. And then the critique popped up that the training wasn't really what Ukraine needed as the war devolved from maneuver warfare to trench warfare, and people started complaining, why aren't they being taught trench clearing, why are they being taught fighting in the forests and what have you. And that is because the Ukrainian army had not yet asked for a change in the training routine. And that change required thinking, planning, and rescheduling to provide the best training possible for the new recruits. So it was just this massive confusion made worse by YouTubers and other online social media personalities who had no, pardon French, but had no fucking clue what the hell was going on when the Western militaries were actually training the Ukrainians in what turns out to be very effective tactics when all was said and done. And like I said, a lot of the critique seemed to end up boiling down to Ukraine not having air power, therefore Western-style combat was not working in Ukraine. And because of all the trenches, Western-style combat was not applicable to Ukraine and all of that. Really weird, strange statements, because here you have a tank hull down making use of cover as he should. Tactics like this, it's still applicable with or without aircraft overhead, right? You still need to behave like this if you're in a vehicle. You still need to be taught how to make use of the terrain to defeat the enemy, how to breach and clear a building, it's still done in the same way with or without friendly aircraft overhead. Same thing when going into a trench line, right? Standard tactics, fire and maneuver, how to support, how to move as a squad, is not affected by friendly aircraft overhead. You still need to be able to do all of this in order to take a hill, in order to push through a tree line or whatever. All of this works. It's still the same. It's not affected by the amount of aircraft flying overhead. Well, unless the aircraft drop bombs on you, but the core basics work, right? All of this, how to breach a bunker or a building, how to push through a forest, how to outflank the enemy, all of this works, right? And this is what the Western militaries were teaching the Ukrainians. So I don't understand the critique that all of this was useless because Ukraine did not have air power. It was a very strange and weird critique of Western support for Ukraine. So now we come to the article I read the other day. It was published on the 21st of April 2025, a bit of a little more than a week ago. Text written by Fredrik Fahlman at the Officerstidningen, the officers paper, and I will provide a link to this article down below. It's in Swedish, so if you're Nordic you can probably manage. But it's a really interesting article because these journalists, they go down to Ukraine to try and find out how well Western doctrine is actually working on the front line. And they go down, they talk to Ukrainians, they talk to foreign volunteers, and to try and figure out how well Western doctrine is implemented and how well it works in actual combat. And it concerns mission command, interoperability, and maneuver warfare. And what the Ukrainians are saying is it works, but it takes time to learn, but we are slowly but surely learning. And it's interesting to read the article because they describe Russian doctrine as well, to compare it to Western logic and Western doctrine. And what they say is that the Russians, they don't have the same way of thought at all. If an unexpected situation occurs, they are often rigid and thereby vulnerable. And that is when the Ukrainians can win the battles. When something unexpected happens to a Russian unit and they just keep pushing according to orders and they can't adapt to the situation. And they go on to say that they don't think any Western army truly understands just how little Russia values a soldier's lives. They are ready to throw just an insane amount of people into death just to achieve success, any form of success on the battlefield. And in Soviet doctrine that the Russians are still following, there is nothing about how to deal with changing circumstance during a mission. It's basically you have an order, you have to follow through, do not think, just do as you're ordered. And this doctrine leads to massive casualty figures. And this is something that they witness every day with the Russians, and we can see it as ourselves when we go online watching YouTube videos or Twitter X feeds or whatever. You can see the Russians pushing constantly despite coming under immense fire. And I mentioned here a couple of days ago, I saw a Russian infantry fighting vehicle driving straight through a minefield until it blew up. Right? They knew they were in a minefield and they just kept going until they either pushed through or blew up. And he says it's difficult to grasp until you see it yourself. And Ukraine has, prior to the war, tried to move away from Russian doctrine and adopt a more Western style of thinking, and they have certain units in the war that are more or less known for operating basically like Western counterparts. And the two most famous units would be the 47th Mechanized Brigade and the 3rd Assault Brigade. Very effective combat units, and they rely heavily on Western tactics to achieve success on the battlefield. And the 47th Mechanized is of course well known. It is known as the most battle hardened and one of the most combat effective units in the Ukrainian army, currently deployed just outside of Belgorod. They've made a name for themselves at within Kursk and at Avdiivka, and currently at Belgorod, like I said. And famous for utilizing American equipment, the Bradleys, the M1A1 Abrams tanks. And they, in the article, they mention that this unit is very strict when it comes to Western doctrine, and they always strive to have suppression on the enemy before you make a move. And they rely heavily on fire and maneuver to achieve success on the battlefield. And the 3rd Assault Brigade is currently situated just south of Kupiansk. Famously, they took the settlement of Nadia a couple of weeks back, if not maybe a month ago. And they are famous for being very effective, very aggressive, and has actually pushed Russia back along their section of the front line, relying also on Western tactics, Western thinking, and making sure that the troops that join their unit get 2 months of training so that they understand the doctrine that they have adopted in their unit, which of course makes them very effective when going on the offensive. So what is it that makes these units so effective? What is it that allows them to outperform the Russians on the battlefield and when they engage them in combat? Well, it comes down to 3 main points that are kind of like the cornerstones of Western doctrine, and that is fire and maneuver, briefing and debriefing, and mission command. And this basically does not exist to the same extent, if at all, in some cases, within Russian doctrine. And this is what ensures that Ukraine can inflict these massive amounts of casualties on the Russians as they're pushing forward. And it also allows these units in particular to be highly effective when they do go on the assault, trying to reclaim and liberate Ukrainian territory. And we're going to go through each of them step by step. So fire and maneuver, what is that? Well, basically it's really simple. No one moves without someone else shooting at the enemy. So you suppress the enemy, force them to duck for cover, and since they're in cover, they can't shoot accurately back at you, and that allows another unit, another soldier, to move, to run for cover, outflank the enemy, or what have you. Sounds simple in theory, but it becomes really difficult when you try to coordinate companies and brigades and what have you to make all of this happen all at the same time. For instance, we saw during 2023 and the Ukrainian counteroffensive during the summer of 2023 that they had trouble coordinating artillery, the fire element, with mechanized units, the maneuver element. So the artillery would fire on a given date and a given time, and they would fire their barrage, but the assault element had not moved into position yet. So the assault was commenced maybe at times 1, 2, and even 3 hours after the barrage had been completed, thereby basically nullifying the effect of the artillery barrage. So the Ukrainian assault element then drove into Russians that were ready and waiting and able to fire back as they attacked. So it is tricky, and the Ukrainians, I think, have learned as the war has progressed. But what is fire and maneuver? Well, in a pinch, like I said, it is one unit shoots and one unit moves, and or a soldier shoots and one soldier moves. So if we're gonna make an example here, we have a farm or something out in the field. Ukraine wants to reach that farm. It is under Russian control. Russia has some troops in this windbreak. They have some troops up here as well. In Ukraine, they have forces here, they have forces here, they have some some support units here. The goal is for this unit to push up here to apply pressure on the farm so that a Bradley or two can then move up and assault across the field and take the farm. What you do then is you launch artillery at this location and at this location and here as well to suppress them. This unit fires down here with everything they have. This unit fires this way and can also fire this way. Now we are opening fire on all enemy locations. They are suppressed, hopefully. That gives this unit the ability to begin maneuvers. As he's pushing up, you need to stop firing here so they can push in and deal with the problem. Artillery, indirect fire, mortars, and machine gun fire from this unit has to stop as they're pushing closer, and then they can take the objective here and come down here. Indirect fire at this location should stop as well. Now, at this point, they can start shooting up at the enemy location. You can start shooting from here, intensifying the fire at this location. And now we can have a Bradley or two coming up from the rear and then launch the assault on this position and taking it out. While you're shooting at it, they can now cross the open field because the Russians up here and Russians are here are suppressed. You can now push in. When you have this farm, say that the assault succeeds, now you can, from the farm, begin opening fire this way at this location. And that allows the Ukrainians up here to push and take this part of the battlefield. So you always maintain suppression on an enemy location. You move artillery around as needed. You may switch from artillery to mortars to get more accurate fire to reduce blue on blue. And you have grenade launchers, you have RPGs and machine gunners moving their fire as an assault element is pushing up to reduce blue on blue. And this is how you can, piece by piece make your way forward on a battlefield. Of course, this is the theory. It is a whole lot more difficult in real life when the enemy is hiding in trenches and shooting back and launching artillery at you and what have you. But this is, in essence, fire and maneuver. And then we have briefing and debriefing. Now, might sound like the most obvious thing in the world that you actually brief your troops on what they're supposed to be doing, and when the mission is over, there's a debriefing, how did it go and what have you. Not so. Not at all what you may expect in the Russian style of command and the style of command that Ukraine is trying to move away from. Again, the summer offensive of 2023, there was some epic online drama between NCOs in the Ukrainian army, certain sergeants complaining about their officers, lieutenants and captains and so on, not listening to them and their advice. They were veterans of the war, they knew how to engage the Russians, and higher command ignored their advice and their knowledge. And this is why briefing and debriefing, a proper culture of briefing and debriefing, is so important. Because there is a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge found among ordinary soldiers, especially amongst the soldiers that have reached rank like sergeants. So, having a culture where you brief troops on what they are supposed to be doing, what they can expect, what you have in, what weapons and what units are in support, that builds confidence, and also listening to their concerns. If they have something that they want to highlight. If they say, remember when we did an assault last month, this and this happened, we need to have, can we have something to help us solve that problem? And also, when the mission is over, debriefing. Listen to the troops. What went wrong? What went right? What do we have to remember for the next mission? In the Russian style of command, officers just tell troops what to do. They don't care what soldiers think. They only want to achieve an objective, and how many soldiers die in the process is none of their concern. So they take massive amount of casualties. Western doctrine is more of a collaboration between officers and soldiers. The officers, they know the big picture. Soldiers, they well and truly understand the small picture, and they need to communicate to have the best result on the battlefield. And this culture, it's not a given in the Ukrainian army, but you have some units that are, that have adopted it, and are operating basically just like a Western style military, where you have proper briefings and proper debriefings. The biggest obstacle, I think, for Ukraine, and being a former Soviet army, and having a lot of officers still stuck in the Russian mindset of how a military should be run. The biggest obstacle is adopting mission command. Mission command is all about trusting the guy in charge closest to the action. Is he a corporal, a sergeant, or a lieutenant? Doesn't really matter. The guy in command closest to the action, you as a superior officer, you need to trust his judgment. That is basically mission command. If you give a unit an area of operations, you're supposed to take that hill or defend that hill or whatever. Trust the guy in charge to handle that order. Do not micromanage. And the same thing is, if he reports back, I'm taking fire, but we're doing this and this, trust him in doing the right decision. Trust the guy closest to the action, that he actually knows what he's doing, and support him when he needs support. Now, mission command goes back decades. It has its origins basically in World War I, when Germany sent out small units into the trenches to operate independently, and it was then evolved as we moved into World War II, with the Germans trusting lower officers and soldiers to actually perform in their areas of operation without micromanaging from high command. And it has since then been adopted by a multitude of armies across the world. And well, it is highly effective. It does demand that you train your troops well, that you train your non-commissioned officers well, you rely on their experience, and you promote the people with experience, and then you can have an effective mission command structure. And basically what it boils down to is trust the guys in charge on every level to seize initiative. That is the end goal. Trust them to seize initiative and maintain momentum when opportunity presents itself. So if a lieutenant in charge of a platoon, he sees I can actually push up and exploit a weakness in the enemy line, he tells his company commander, I'm pushing up because I can advance. And the company commander then takes a quick look. Yeah, nothing else is happening right now. Go for it. I'll support you. He calls back in to battalion command that the platoon is pushing, so the entire company is moving up to support. The battalion then, well, I'm going to have to trust the captain of that company that he knows what he's doing. I'm moving in support to support the company. Now we go up to the next step on the brigade level, and they're like, shit, a battalion is on the move because a lieutenant started a push, and I must now support the battalion with what I can. So that is mission command, trusting the guys closest to the action to make the right call and then supporting him. and trusting them to make the correct judgment within their assigned area of operations. Trust them to be able to defend properly, trust them to push up properly, and do not micromanage everything. That is what the Soviets were doing, and that is what Russia is doing. That is why we saw so many Russian generals die early on in the war in 2022, because they were so close to the front line that when command posts were being hit by Ukrainian artillery, the generals died because they were close to the front line, micromanaging everything. It makes the command structure really rigid and strict. Troops on the front line, they can't exploit advantages. They don't dare to move when they should be moving because they haven't been given an order to move, and so on. So you have some units in the Ukrainian army that has adopted mission command. It works when they trust their NCOs, when they trust the guy closest to the action. That is when you have result on the battlefield. The Russians, they don't do this. This is anathema to the Russian military mindset, and that is why we're seeing such huge casualty numbers in the Russian army. Now, a lesser known aid provided to Ukraine came in 2023 when the Swedish Armed Forces provided Ukraine with a Ukrainian version, or a translated version, of the Swedish field manual known as Sold F. And it is mandatory and required reading in the 47th Mechanized Brigade, this highly capable, very aggressive and battle-hardened Ukrainian unit that we've already been talking about, that does use Western-style tactics to have success on the battlefield. And in this unit, the Swedish field manual is required reading, and it has helped them. It has supporting them in their efforts in maintaining the high standards that they now enjoy, and it helps them and the soldiers to operate effectively on the battlefield. And this is not light reading. Well, it is. It's a whole bunch of areas, very easily detailed and easily read through, but there are quite a lot of pages to be truthful, but it informs the soldier of everything a soldier needs to know: how to deal with chemical warfare, how to build a proper foxhole, how to do patrols, how to do checkpoints, standard tactics for infantrymen, how to build trench lines, how to deal with POWs, what you can expect as a POW and stuff like that. It is a very, very useful book that the 47th Mechanized has as required reading for its troops. And when we take a look at the article I was talking about here in the beginning, you can see here that when they're talking to a Swedish volunteer in the 47th Brigade here, he says that they picked the best from the Swedish, English, American, and Canadian Army and put it all together to make the 47th as effective as it is. And they put a lot of focus on fire and maneuver. And he also says the Bible that the soldiers have in the field is Sold F. And he says everyone reads it. There's no doubt about it. And he even has tests with him. He talks to the soldiers. Do you remember what it says here and here and there? And they have to repeat it to him, what the book says for him, or what the book says to him. So this is an incredibly important tool for the 47th Mechanized down in Ukraine. And I'm not going to go through every page of SOLDEF, but I mean it has useful information as how much various materials you need to have an effective protection against incoming fire: steel, concrete, stone, brick walls, sandbags, wood, and what have you. And here, down here, the amount of artillery that will be aimed at an area in order to be effective against infantry. So in a 100 by 100 square area, the amount of artillery, if you're out in the open, they need 1 ton of artillery shells. But if you have built a proper trench line with a proper shelter, they're going to need 20 tons of ammunition to effectively strike half of the soldiers that are located in this area. So as you can see, it tells you quite a lot that digging in and building proper trench lines increases your chances of survival significantly. And of course, it provides detailed information on how to build defenses, how to build trench lines and bunkers, and how to set up barbed wire to protect your location, what have you. I mean, all the good stuff that the Ukrainians well and truly need to know, considering the type of warfare they're currently conducting against the Russians. And it covers how you maintain your combat value, how you should talk to each other, how you should maintain your equipment, how to build toilets in the field, how to keep warm, how to stay clean, and even how to keep dry in the trenches, and various other things. It's just a very comprehensive, but still very easy to read book on how to be the most effective as a soldier in the field. And it also deals with, like we were talking about before, debriefing after the combat. After the combat, it's important that you reduce the effects of stress, right? Learn what you can learn and move on. And it gives the squad leader some simple questions what they can ask soldiers that are showing signs of stress or shock or what have you. Debrief the squad. What happened? What were you thinking? What were you feeling? What will happen now? Explain what's going to happen. How do they feel about what's going to happen? What can we learn from all of this? And what should we do the next time? And so on, right? And help the soldiers move on. And of course, useful information on how to deal with an armored vehicle. And I found this pretty interesting. Here you have detailed or explains briefly how to conduct gå på marsch, how Swedish soldiers use this tactic to push forward, to push into an enemy position and engage the enemy at point blank range, close combat. Basically, the gå på marsch was, of course, the old bayonet charge of the Swedish army during the early 1700s. And here we have the modern gå på marsch, where you shoot all the way up to the enemy line and then engage him point blank and engage him with bayonets, with the elbows, with kicks, with whatever you have at your disposal, swinging the rifle like a club, whatever you have to do to deal with the problem when you push into the enemy position. Gå på marsch. So the Ukrainians can learn how to assault an objective like a Swedish soldier. We also have learned that Ukraine is moving away from brigade-style system that Western armies favor, and they're now going to implement a corps system instead, where you have more top-down, a more rigid top-down command structure. And there are some pros and cons to this, so we're going to take a look at that briefly. And one potential positive thing about this is that the 3rd Assault Brigade will be put in command of its own corps. And since the 3rd Assault Brigade is so heavily influenced by Western style military, it should hopefully mean that the entire core is handled like a Western style military as well. So instead of you have the 3rd Assault Brigade pushing in up here, fighting in this area, they are now in control of the entire front line in this sector, and that means you can hopefully have a effective Western style approach to engaging the enemy along this entire front line, and not just this piece here right outside of Rahorodovka. So that's my hope, at least, that with this new core command structure, that the 3rd Assault Brigade will influence all the other units with this Western style thinking, mission command, and fire and maneuver, and that will hopefully help the Ukrainians in this part of the battlefield to overcome the Russian aggressors more effectively. But the article does mention that there is a downside to moving over to the core command structure instead of the more loosely, more adaptable brigade structure, and that is that this does appear as if Ukraine is falling back to Soviet-style core structures instead of moving forward with NATO doctrines and flexible combat groups. And the man that they are interviewing is a former colonel in the Ukrainian army, and he says that he often hears from colleagues who are currently serving that the high command can intervene with tactical decisions all the way down to platoon level, right? So colonels and generals move around companies and platoons within companies and telling them where to move and where to put up fire positions and what have you, without having any knowledge of the actual layout of the ground, or having any knowledge about the soldiers in question and the combat value of the soldiers and the platoon, how much ammo they have, how much sleep they have had, and stuff like that. And this used to be like we see in the Russian army, and there's a risk that Ukraine will now revert to Russian style of command, where they undermine the faith in lower commanders, lower officers, as well as vital NATO components as military decision-making processes and operations planning processes, and that they will no longer use these Western-style command structures. And so let's remember what we talked about early on, that in the Soviet doctrine, there's nothing about how to adapt to changing circumstances on the battlefield. You are given an order and you have to perform that order no matter what, right? Which leads to high casualty figures. And the Russians, they are not thinking like Western style armies do. No mission command. There is no emphasis on fire and maneuver. When they do reach an unexpected situation, they are rigid, they can't adapt, and that makes them vulnerable. And here we have the real danger of moving from brigade structure to core structure, that Ukraine will revert to the old Russian style of strict top-down command structure. So what can we learn from this? Well, Western style tactics, doctrine, and command structure is sporadically used within the Ukrainian army. There are certain units that have adopted it more effectively, efficiently. Some units use it haphazardly to some extent, and other units are basically run like old school Russian style units. But what we can see is when Ukrainians have adopted Western tactics, Western doctrine, it works and it makes them very effective on the battlefield. And they can take the fight to the Russians very effectively and can inflict massive amounts of casualties on the Russians as a result. And this should give us some sense of security in Europe. Our way of training soldiers, our way of training officers, it works. It makes our armies far superior to the Russian army. And we're seeing it being put to the test in Ukraine. We can see what works. The Ukrainians are tweaking here and there, making sure that theory actually works in practice, and we can learn from those experiences. But overall, Western style tactics and doctrine and command structure and how to deal with soldiers, how to treat soldiers, it works, and it makes our militaries far superior to the Russian army, and that should give us some sense of security here in Europe. So yeah, it was just such a strange experience there during 2023 and 2024 when you saw YouTubers and other people complaining about NATO style doctrine and that it wasn't working in Ukraine because Ukraine did not have air superiority. Really strange, because what NATO and the other countries were teaching the Ukrainians was basic tactics for soldiers, basic tactics for vehicles. Now, aircraft and air support and all of that is important when you move up the chain of command and begin planning larger operations. But it has nothing to do with how soldiers operate on the ground when the enemy is 20 meters away from them. Just weird stuff, especially when they were teaching the Ukrainian soldiers what the Ukrainian army was asking them to teach them. Yeah, anyway. So in the end, we now know that Western doctrine and Western tactics actually works when put to the test against a Russian enemy. But that's going to have to be it. I hope you found it interesting. I hope I'll see you in the next one. As always, go på marsch, Ukraine, and give them hell.